Jack the Lost Tank Engine by Mr. Christopher James Rush as the new storyteller. Chapter 1. The Engine Who Was Born from the Scrapyard. Mr. and Mrs. Lumpert of the History Museum and a Railway Orphanage of number 13 Twinkle Drive were history directors of the Lost History Things, and are proud to say that they like to have things the way they were. Thank you very much. They were the last members of Dr. Baron Beeching's friends you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just want things as they are with no nonsense. Mr. Lumpert was teacher of the orphanage, which held children with no parents. He was a person who had a broad way and a mind of slack, which he uses to make excuses, but some kids who used to be here were not humans, just ponies, and a baby dragon who knew better than kids. Now the grown-ups, which are all humans, and Mr. Lumpert, which Spike called a bonehead. Mrs. Lumpert was the president of the museum and was a lurker who sometimes lurked up behind anybody looking about. Eh? The Lumperts had a small son called Ryder. Oh, you are a tyke. And in their opinion, they like him to do public work only on roads, not on rails. The Lumperts had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. Some family members-in-law or some people we've forgotten about were after Tilly, and had killed each other when they failed to get her back in where she came from. They read the newspapers saying she escaped America a long time ago, and others that have moved from countries to some place they never knew about, somewhere in Australia. If they could find an engine which has strange ways of wandering off, they would keep him or her in the museum, where they want them to be. They like engines that can't talk. Have you heard the news about Tilly that has not been sent back to America? It's very strange. When morning came, they were getting ready for work, but as they were, none of them noticed a dark black object of a purner was standing in sight. At 7:30, Mr. Lumport was heading to his car, said goodbye to Mrs. Lumport and Ryder, and as they went back in the house in the orphanage, and as he got to his car, he was about to catch something in his eyesight. It was out of nowhere that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. The black purner reading a map. For a second, Mr. Lumport didn't seem to realize what he had seen. Then he took a sudden look again. There was the black purner, and it was standing in the property of Twinkle Drive. But purners can't read anything. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick. He wouldn't take a thing to believe. Mr. Lumport blinked and stared at the black purner. It stared back. As Mr. Lumport drove out of sight, he watched the purner in the side mirror. He could see it wasn't a trick. It was reading the sign that said Twinkle Drive. No, looking at signs, purners couldn't read them or maps. This is a bit silly. Mr. Lumport gave himself a little shake and put the purner out of his mind. As he came to the museum, he thought of nothing except doing the managing. But as he got out of his car, managing was driven out of his mind by something else. He couldn't help but notice that there seemed to be a lot of strange objects he couldn't believe to see in real life. An engine coloured green, along with another, were looking at the museum. The things with faces Mr. Lumport thought the fakery people would make up these days. He supposed this was some stupid get-up. As he turned to the museum, but was putting his eyes on the engine, he could see that they were whispering together, and was enraged to see that they were talking. None of them have fake faces at all on the engines. Why, that engine he had never heard was Percy, the small engine. He saw a YouTube series about him. And the other engine he saw, the books and VHS tapes, was Thomas, the tank engine. The nerve of them! But then it struck Mr. Lumpole that this was probably some silly stunt. When he saw another engine, which was red, he saw it was James the Red Engine, who was, to his shock, was staring at him. He went to the museum. Ow! Mr. Lumpole always sat beside the window in his office. If he hadn't, he would have found it a bit difficult to concentrate on managing. He didn't see other ponies that can fly like a dark blue one. The people in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as it was out for a walk with a purple pony that was with her. They seemed to be with the engines. Mr. Lumpole, however, had a perfectly normal engine and pony-free morning. He yelled at engines who visited some parts of London, made several important telephone calls, and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a pie from the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the engines until they passed them, who were still at the museum. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they seemed to be making him uneasy. They were whispering together, and he couldn't see a single newsstand. It was on his way back past them with what he collected from the bakers that he got taken aback from some engine crew. "Excuse me, sir. Can I have you for a minute? Percy and Thomas and James have some talking. You should come and listen," said Percy's driver. "No, I certainly won't fall for this nonsense," said Mr. Lumpole. Percy wheezed steam at him and dragged him in. "You listen to what we're saying," said Percy. "It should get you interested." "I said I won't stand for this," said Mr. Lumpole. "Okay, have it your way," Percy fired back. So they let him go, till he caught a few words of what they were saying. "An engine being born from the scrapyard. That's right. That's what I heard. Yeah, Thomas. Twilight and Princess Luna, both the princess ponies, named him Jack," said Percy and James together. Mr. Lumpole stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the engines, who showed him a smug face, thinking he would get interested. They knew he would get that name in him. Mr. Lumpole wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back inside the museum. "He's been fear-flooded," James laughed. The others laughed too. Mr. Lumpole had already snapped at his secretary not to disturb him on his way back to his office, and had seized the phone and had almost dialed his home number when he changed his mind. He put the phone down and went into a ball of thoughts, thinking. No, he was being stupid. An engine with the name Jack can't talk, and it was such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people who had an engine with different names. Come to think of it, he remembered when he was little, he never even seen the engine. It might have been jink or drunk. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Lumpole. She always got so upset at any mention of Tilly. He and her were wanting to meet, and they wanted her in the museum, but it failed when she escaped her railway. He didn't blame her, if he had an engine like that. But all the same, Thomas, Percy and James, those engines and two ponies, called Twilight Sparkle, who was a princess because she's learned about friendship like honesty, kindness, laughter, generosity, loyalty, and magic, and a princess pony named Princess Luna, who was a sister of Princess Celestia. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on work that afternoon, and when he left the museum at 5 p.m., he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted as a man stumbled and fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Lumpole realized another strange figure was here in London too. He didn't seem upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a smile, and he said, "Don't be sorry, sir, for nothing could upset me today. I'm Captain Cook, and some old changers like yourself should be celebrating this happy day of an engine born in the scrapyards." I left. Mr. Lumpole stood rooted to the spot. He met a stranger, and also thought he had been called a world changer. Whatever that was, he was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things which he had never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. The first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the black pony he'd spotted that morning. It was standing beside the house. He was sure it had been the same one. "Shoo!" said Mr. Lumpole loudly. The black pony did not move. It gave him an angry look. "Show yourself, you big bonehead! How dare you say so to me?" It made a scary, sharp voice, which frightened Mr. Lumpot. Was this pony meant to... Was this normal pony behavior? Mr. Lumpot wondered, trying to pull himself together. He let himself into the house. He was determined not to mention anything to his wife. "You get stressed if you don't watch out." Mrs. Lumpot had a perfect normal day, checking the kids doing their learning. She told him over dinner all about Tom, who was visiting their place doing the cleaning, but she didn't know it was Tom, not the cleaner, the driver, who was a teenager, was listening to them. And how Ryder had learnt a new word, shan't. Mr. Lumpot tried to ignore me. When Ryder had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, engine watchers everywhere have reported that the engines have been behaving very unusual today. Although engines are doing tourist attraction work and are in museums, and was seen using a line to some island where nobody would know. It was somewhere in Australia. Many reports say they're heading to a better life. We don't know where. Instead of working in the other railway in England and America, the television news said. Most mysterious. And over to John with some newsletter. Thank you, Harry. This letter says that this affair is about this man saying he has some idea of helping engines and giving them new life. This man, like the Reverend Wilbert Alger, is known as the model writer, Mr. Christopher James Ross. He says that all these engines are living in Tasman Sodor. It's in Australia, and he says, since I've helped with Georgia Wood, I've learned about engines' lives. This man, Mr. Lumpot, does not seem to be the right person to know about this, but he is, when I've been told from Twilight Sparkle that she and Luna have created an engine called Jack. We'll wish all these engines good luck. Mr. Lumpot sat frozen in his armchair. The affair happening in England and every country, and all this fitted with Jack. Mrs. Lumpot came into the living room. It was no good. He had to tell her. He cleared his throat nervously. Dimmer, dear, you haven't heard from the person who seemed to read the newsletter about ponies making an engine, and all these engines moving to Tasman Sodor, have you? As he had expected, Mrs. Lumpot was shocked and angry. After all, They didn't want to lose engines in their museum. No? She said sharply. Why? An affair, a funny one on the news, Mr. Lamport mumbled. Engines moving out of England and America, and there were some ponies and engines today. So? Snapped Mrs. Lamport. Well, I thought maybe it was something to do with, you know, this affair, I said. Mrs. Lamport's mouth went down in a stern way. Mr. Lamport wondered whether he dared tell her he'd heard an engine's name, Jack, because she told him her brother was called Jack. He didn't dare. Instead he said as casually as he could, The engine, Jack, is made from the scrapyard. But there's no creation in the scrapyard, said Mrs. Lamport. What's the engine's name again? Junk, isn't it? Jack. Nasty common name if you ask me. Oh, yes, said Mr. Lamport, his heart sinking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went to bed. Ouch! While they were asleep in the property, the black pony was still in the property of Twinkle Drive. Standing in every gloom in where she was standing, as though it was waiting for something. It watched Mr. Lamport, who saw her the third time. He was lying awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the ponies and engines were involved, there was no reason for them to come to them. They knew very well what the Lamports thought about them with business they don't know. He couldn't see how they could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. Mr. Lamport might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the black pony was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was standing still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the entrance of Twinkle Drive. It did not so much quiver when a door slammed somewhere, nor were some night animals were out. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the black pony moved at all. Out of the darkness, a green saddle tank engine appeared at the entrance so suddenly and silently, you'd have thought he was just formed from the mist fog. The black pony's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this tank engine had ever been seen in Twinkle Drive. He was, as we have met him, coloured green, small, and has a number 6 on his side. The engine was Percy that we saw. Percy didn't seem to realize that he'd just arrived in a place where everything from his name to his lamp he uses at night was unwelcome. He asked his driver to rummage in his cab shelf. He was looking for something. Percy did realize he was being watched, because he looked up at the black pony, which was still staring at him from where she was standing. For some reason, the sight of it seemed to make him realize it was Princess Luna, being Nightmare Moon. He chuckled and muttered, "I might have known." His driver found what he was looking for. In his cab shelf, he put it on Percy's buffer. It seemed to be a stick, but it was a wand that belonged to a person well known and was a lost family member, Harry Potter. He muttered a spell. The light went out from every street lamp, except the lamps he left alone. Percy's driver put the stick back in the cab and went up to Nightmare Moon, standing near the orphanage house. "Fancy meeting you here, Nightmare Moon." "Good evening, Percy. I'm glad you've learned from night animals you can meet me at this time of night." "My dear friend, it is nice to meet you doing night duties, but you didn't like daylight when you were hiding all day." "You'd feel half hidden if you tried to avoid the light when you have to stay in the shadows all day," said my Nightmare Moon. "All day when you're celebrating the birth of an engine Twilight and you were making? I must have passed a dozen station parties on my way here." Nightmare Moon sniffed angrily. "Oh, yes. Everyone's celebrating all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no. Even the world changers have noticed something's going on. It was on the news." She jerked her head at the Lumport's dark living room window. "I heard it. All the engines. Well, they're not completely stupid. They're bound to notice something. The newsletter from Captain Cook was telling the world he's taking every engine to live on Tasman Sodor." "You can't blame them," said Percy gently. "We've had precious little to celebrate 200 years. "I know that," said Nightmare Moon irritably. "But that's no reason to lose our heads. Some people owning and living in the orphanages would notice. You and your friends. That man was shocked to know our engine's name." She twitched her tail in a grumpy manner. "So," she went on, "a fine thing it would be if on the day any bad person seems to have wanted to follow the first criminal's footsteps. This man named Dr. Baron Beeching has died a long time ago." "That's why engines should have a chance of what they want to wish for," said Percy. "We have to be glad he's dead. He has not enough sense. Want some pizza?" Some what? Pizza. Italian food. My driver's fond of them. Doesn't it one know that we permers can't eat that sort of food? Percy, you know as well as I do, we permers don't eat pizza, said Knight Mamoon coldly, as though thinking this was not the moment for pizzas. As I even say, even if Baron Beating would listen, my dear pony, surely an animal like yourself can know he's forgotten, and his guilt would be found out when anyone reads his history. Well, all right, I've killed his soul, anyway. Knight Mamoon shot a sharp look at Percy and said, Newsletters sometimes don't get through to everyone. Sometimes anyone who would like to stop this great affair. Would anyone do that sort of thing? It seemed that Knight Mamoon had reached the point that she was most anxious to discuss the real reason she had been waiting on hard days, for neither Black Pony nor the princess had fixed Percy with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Percy told her it was true. He did not answer. What anyone is saying, she pressed on, is that last year, in 1999, engines were taken to get scrapped, and others are made to do tourist work. And that they want to do ultimate work when they hate living in England and America. Percy's mouth went down. Knight Mamoon gasped. During the end of the age of steam, British railways caused a problem in certain American railways, and after many railways were running. Oh, Percy. She rubbed her face on Percy's. I know, said Percy heavily. Knight Mamoon's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. We didn't want Jack to be in this big community, Mrs. Railways, because, well, it's like school, and he wants to learn things himself. Thomas and James are secretly teaching him how to do work. Is it true that British Railways is not to be trusted when an engine and another are made in secret? Yes, it is true, said Percy. Percy looked up at a street clock. Thomas and James are late. I suppose they told you I would meet you here. Yes, said Knight Mamoon. And I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places. I've come to bring Jack to this museum. It may not be his fine home, but it's best he goes to a coal yard to meet up with Smelly. He too is made from you in the woods. Thomas and James are explaining this task he has to do in life before he comes to Tasman's Sodor. Surprisingly, he seems to learn quickly, like baby spiders that are quick learners. You don't mean... You can't mean the people who live here? Cried Nightmare Moon, feeling a little shocked. Percy, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find two people who were less like anyone with much sense. And their son, I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for lollies. Jack lives here. It's what he has to learn in life, said Percy firmly. Really, Percy, you think he can manage this difficult first life here in this orphanage? These people will never understand him. They'll never let him go. He'll be heading for trouble he would avoid. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Jack the Lost Engine Day in future. There will be books written about Jack. Every child in the world will know his name. Exactly, said Percy. It would be enough to turn any engine's head. He can be famous. Yes, you're right, of course. But how's he getting here? Thomas and James are taking him. They should be here by now. Well, I must admit, they are good teachers, your friends. That can help the little engine to learn things himself with no... What was that? They looked up as the noise shattered in the Twinkle Drive place. Thomas and James have arrived with Jack. Well done, you two. And how's Jack learning? Fine, Percy, said Thomas. He's a quick learner. I could talk too, said Jack. I got my face created from your pony friend. Another. Percy explained to Jack he had a task to do in England before coming to Tasman's Sodor. You're to know that you're living in this museum, or hiding here, more like. And if you find a chance to escape, make it. It's a secret, and you can't let the Lumports know about it. And if they see you here, well, they'll put you into things you haven't done, like bringing in children who have no family. What's wrong with them? They haven't died, and we hate having them alive. We want them dead. What do they have against anything with me? Well, their minds and personality is still with them now and then. We best leave you. Good luck. Right. Oh, there's a shed I can rest in. Jack steamed into the museum. He gave a sad little as if his whistle was blocked. Quiet, puppet. You get us found out. Sorry, you lot. I can't stand British Railways. Not trustworthy, and me living in this good-for-nothing home. I'll say goodbye. Bye then. Come on. Let's let him learn here. The ensigns and Nightmare Moon left. As they did, they said together in a whisper, "To Jack, the lost tank engine who is born from the scrapyard." End of Chapter 1.